got 3 questions. One is that you mentioned about 2 of 4 Kenyan indictees intending to run for president. And look at it from the perspective of Bashir, who, in spite of having been indicted, continues presiding over Sudan. So they feel emboldened that in the event of either of them, or if they run as a presidential and a running mate, they win, they could in a way try to subvert the ICC process. So what would be the repercussions in the event that either of the 2 or both end up being president or deputy president of the country?
Any of those would be enough as president or deputy president, respective countries.
We're talking about
Bashir and the other name?
Kenya.
Kenya.
Second question, why is it that in the Kenyan case...
Your first question is, you got that?
Yeah.
Why is it that in the Kenyan case, the ICC, according to me, indicted foot soldiers? Because in Ivory Coast, Bagbo, Sudan, Bashir, Yugoslavia, Milosevic, but in Kenya,
Foot soldiers.
yes.
Where, in Sudan?
In Kenya. In Kenya.
In Kenya.
Yes, in spite of even the evidence.
But look, sorry to interrupt, but you may know better than I do. I don't believe that the people who've been indicted from Kenya are the foot soldiers. I mean, you've got leaders involved. You've got Kenyatta and you've got other leading. Who else should have been indicted?
Because according to the evidence that was adduced at the ICC, some of the meetings in which violence was organized took place at the State House. Why would the president be part of those indicted? And then
I think 2 questions are
okay.
fair enough.
Yeah.
Firstly on al-Bashir, you know, I don't believe a head of state who's under an indictment from the International Criminal Court can really do his job properly. It's unfortunate in my view that he's been able to travel freely only in 4 African states. In Chad, in Ethiopia, and I think in Mali and one other. I think to the credit of our government, al-Bashir would be arrested if he came to South Africa. And that's the reason we didn't attend the inauguration of President Zuma. Malawi refused to have him at the African summit a couple of months ago. And I think to its shame, the AU said, well, then we'll transfer the summit from Malawi to Addis Ababa. But I don't believe it can be pleasant for a head of state to know that he's subject to arrest in 121 countries under a Security Council resolution. So I don't think any of us would like to be in the shoes of President al-Bashir. He can't rest well at night knowing that he's indicted for genocide. I can think of nothing worse than to have an arrest warrant out for somebody for genocide and crimes against humanity. So I think it must, I hope, be a deterrent to some other leaders who may be planning to commit war crimes. And these crimes continue to be committed. I read only last week of a new increase in violence in Darfur. As far as foot soldiers are concerned, this is always a problem. It's a problem I faced in the Yugoslavia tribunal. You know, let me give you an example. When we started the Rwanda tribunal, I appointed a leading Canadian investigator as the head of the investigations into the Rwanda genocide. And he came to me after 4 weeks of study and consultation, and he said to me, if you give me 18 months, I will give you proof to indict the whole leadership of the government that ordered the slaughter of so many people in Rwanda, over 800,000 people. And I said to him, Al, his name was Al Bro, I said to him, if we don't issue indictments in 8 weeks, let alone 18 months, we're not going to be here. The United Nations is not going to give us money if we can't prove we're able to do the job. I had the same problem in the former Yugoslavia. So we had to start issuing indictments against what the newspapers called small fish, because we didn't have evidence yet against the big fish. I would have loved to have issued an indictment in October 1994 against Karadzic and or Mladic, but we didn't yet have the evidence. But we had evidence in October of 1994 against a man called Nikolic. And I was told by friends of the tribunal in New York, if you don't get an indictment by November, you won't get a budget. The UN was just about insolvent. The Americans were not paying their dues. It was one of their periods of fighting with the UN. The organisation was just about insolvent. So I got out an indictment against Nikolic. He wasn't the most suitable first person to be indicted by the first ever International Criminal Court. But it was for internal politics. It was to ensure we survived that happened. And the same in the beginning of the Rwanda tribunal. But it didn't take long to get indictments against the leaders. But I think you must understand the problems that prosecutors have in some of these situations. And Rwanda was easier because in the case of Rwanda, it wasn't difficult to find out who the leaders were. They announced themselves. It was Bagasora and other leaders in Rwanda who organized the genocide, who boasted about it. And you know, ego is quite useful to prosecutors. One of the reasons we could get out an indictment against Karadzic was because he proudly boasted on his television. He said, I'm the commander-in-chief of my army, and nothing happens in my army without me knowing about it. Well, that was quite useful, quite a useful admission of Karadzic. But you need other evidence. You can't do it on that alone. So it's a complicated issue. I understand where you're coming from, and I understand and fully sympathize with that complaint. Again, because what you want really is even-handedness. You want everybody to be treated in the same way by the institution.
More questions?
I have two questions. The first is about whether it's possible to indict companies and other sort of like non-juristic persons. So you can avoid sort of Alien Tort Act. I mean, obviously it's difficult with countries like the US not signatory to the ICC, but countries that are, South African, for example, would it be possible to bring a company to book? And the second one is about the kind of the relationship between fence on the one hand, which I understand is really important, and on the other hand, like who you choose to indict. So, for example, in Côte d'Ivoire, Bagbo might be there, but Ouattara isn't. And in Ivory Coast, the 80 or so who have been arrested have all been kind of Bagbo supporters. So isn't that going to be an issue that there's just sort of it is unfair? And if that's the case, it's very hard to take a tribunal seriously, even if there is a practical side to it.
Yeah, let me say immediately, I'm really not in a position to deal with the Côte d'Ivoire. I just don't know enough about the politics and the events. I've tried to follow it, but it's really been fairly superficial. So I apologize for that. On the corporation, on the company question, it's a big issue at the moment in a number of countries. The ICC cannot. Under the Rome Statute, only individuals can be indicted, not groups. And it was different. It's been the same with all the modern international criminal courts. It was the same with Yugoslavia, Rwanda. It was different at Nuremberg. At Nuremberg, companies could and were indicted. Krupp, for example, was indicted, and the Nazi High Command was indicted as a group. But the philosophy, I think, today is that crimes are committed by individuals and not by groups. And there shouldn't be guilt by association. So as a former prosecutor, I prefer the more simple approach of indicting individuals. But at the same time, clearly some multinational corporations should be in the dock. I mean, the companies that provide arms, that provide mercenaries, that commit war crimes, shouldn't be let off the hook. There's a big issue facing the United States Supreme Court at the moment. It's a problem that came up with the apartheid litigation in New York under the Alien Tort Claims Act in the United States. It's being argued in the American courts that corporations may not be indicted under the Alien Tort Claims Act. So it's a developing field, and it's moving inexorably, I think, in the direction of holding corporations criminally liable. And as a citizen, I support it. As a prosecutor, it may raise difficulties that I was happy I didn't have to face. But that's laziness, not principle.
Any other questions?